Nice to have you here. Make sure we're recording so you can revisit all the juicy stuff that we're going to be talking about. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm just going to pin our star guest so you know what we're talking about. Happy Monday. How is everyone feeling tonight? Feel like that could be quite a loaded question, seeing as well, maybe once you've finished our book of the moment, or even after tonight's event, maybe you'd answer it in a different way. I wonder. So I'm Toni, I'm your host tonight, and I'm the founder of the Shelf Help Club. And the Shelf Help Club it's a book club, it's a community, it's a platform, and we are all about celebrating self-help, working on ourselves, working on our personal growth and our self-health. And so for autumn, our theme is physical health. Specifically, we're looking at the mind-body connection. And I'm sure you know that the book I've chosen to support is How Your Mind Can Heal Your Body by Dr. David Hamilton, who I'm delighted to say is here with us to talk about the book, to introduce us to the book and his work. I know that lots of you here know Dr. David already. I've had daily messages actually from people counting down to tonight. That's how much people are looking forward to it, which makes me very happy that you already know some of Dr. David's work. If you don't, then I think you might know some of his books, because I Heart Me was a book of the moment in March 2018, which feels like such a long time ago.
Wow.
And then last I know, can you believe it? And then last year we workshopped all things woo-woo with Dr. David's latest book, the current latest book. There's a new one in the works always. For anyone who doesn't know about our star guest, Dr. David Hamilton is a scientist and a leading pioneer in the science of the mind-body connection, which is what we're going to be talking about tonight. He's the author of 11 books to date, and very importantly, an advocate for kindness as a way to live our happiest and our healthiest lives, in fact. So he's also a brilliant friend of the Shelf Help Club. So thank you for being here, David. So awesome to have you. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thanks very much for inviting me again and for choosing one of my books. I'm absolutely thrilled. I love what Shelf Help are doing. I just love the work you do. I love your community. It's just a really good vibe to what you all do.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of synergy, isn't there? Because
yeah, absolutely. I think it's very positive and quite exciting, actually.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's what I said. So it's about celebrating working on ourselves, and kind of, we don't need to be broken to read this stuff and to learn this stuff. In fact, it's just like going to the gym for our bodies, like going to the gym for our minds and our hearts, really. So for everyone at home, it's going to be quite informal tonight. We're your mics are off, but keep your cameras on if you like to see who's here. And we're going to use the chat box to chat. So log in there, say who you are, where you are. Are you reading this book? Maybe not yet, but you hopefully will be at the end of this event. And yeah, ask any questions as we go, and we're going to kind of keep it quite informal. I'm going to interview David about his work, and then we're going to dive into the book, and we're going to finish with the guided visualization. So if you can be somewhere where you're not going to be disturbed, that would be perfect. But if you've got headphones or whatever, then that should be great as well. So David, where are you? How are you today? What are you up to?
I'm in a wee town in central Scotland called Dunblane, famous for Andy Murray and Jamie Murray, the former world #1 tennis players. How am I? I'm doing pretty good. I've had quite a good day, blend between working and a wee bit of dog walking and a wee bit of tennis. So, best of three worlds.
That sounds like a great Monday so far.
It's getting better.
And that is that an average day in your life, would you say? Do you have like a standard day?
It probably is, actually. To be honest. Yeah, it kind of changes depending on what time of the year it is. Like I'm about to start year 6 of a part-time university degree in mathematics and physics. So in between term times from October to end of May, early June, I work a couple of hours a day in math and physics, quantum mechanics, that kind of stuff. And then I do all my writing and all my other stuff, but that term finishes. So over the summer, I'm writing a new book at the moment because I've got a bit more time in my hands. So, but it pretty much goes from working, dog walking, and tennis. That's pretty much the 3 things that I do during the day.
In that order. I love it. And so Shelf Help really is about improving the relationship we have with ourselves. That's the most important relationship we have. So I love to ask people, how would you sum up your relationship with yourself currently? Is there a word or a phrase that might do that?
I would probably say excitedly improving, and that's in two ways, because, you know, I one of the things I do for my physical health and my mental health, as well as writing. I love writing. I do that for my mental health because I love it. It's, you know, part of my feeling a sense of purpose is doing something that you really want to do, supports your mental health. But physically and mentally, I also play tennis at least about an hour a day on average. And I feel like I'm improving a lot, and I'm excited about my improvement because I got to the semi-finals of the secondary tournament in Dunblane Tennis Club, and I took up tennis in my mid-40s. I talk about it actually in that book, How I Learned to Serve. So I got to the semi-finals of the secondary tournament. And so that went really well, you know, so I've made so I'm excited about my improvement. I'm also excited about the improvement I've made in my writing, because I'm writing at the moment in a very different style from I've written in the past, with a new book. So I'd say that maybe sums up where I'm at right now.
I love that. How does it feel when you look back at books like your first baby books?
Do you know what? I hadn't thought of that until earlier this year. Hay House asked if I would record the audiobook of my very first book. Now, I self-published my very first book in 2005, It's the Thought That Counts. And then Hay House bought the rights and republished it in 2006. And, you know, audiobooks only really started about, you know, I don't know, 6-7 years ago, that or thereabouts, got really, you know, people started getting into them. So I had only ever recorded audiobooks of my books from I Heart Me, which you did a few years ago. So I only started recording audiobooks were there. I did my kindness book. I did How Your Mind Can Heal Your Body, this book of the month. But it never occurred to me that we'd ever do an older book. And then Hay House asked me to do my very first book because apparently it was still trickling on. People were still buying it. I think they did it on Amazon, dropped it to 99 pence. And I think it got to the top 100 or something. And so it was great because I'd forgotten what I'd written. I'd actually forgotten. I was reading some of my book for the first time, literally in 15 years, and going, wow, that's quite interesting. I'd forgotten it. I completely
You're impressing
forgotten.
yourself.
Yeah, no, it's funny because the way I describe things, some things is a wee bit different now from where it was maybe 15 years ago or so. And so I was fascinated what I'd written about and how I'd written about it and stuff. And, you know, just really cool. I really loved reflecting back because it made me think of the journey that I've made and also how I felt when I was determined to write my first book, what that felt like inside. When I really, it was so in my heart. I felt it was my purpose. I really wanted to write a book. I even left my job as a research and development scientist because I wanted to write a book. And it was so in my heart. And I remember so fondly that journey. Like I wrote half the book in the middle of the night because I had no other time in my life to fit in the writing. So I actually wrote in the middle of the night, 4 nights a week, from like midnight till, 3 o'clock in the morning. And I so fondly, when I was reading the audiobook, I was able to reflect back on what that journey was like and where I was in my life at that time and the thoughts that I was having at the time. And it was a nice, a nice way to appreciate where I was now and how I felt I've developed in the years since.
Yeah, incredible. And just touching on that, on the difference now, like you are now someone who spreads the word of the healing power of the mind, of kindness, of how we can affect our body with our thoughts and our mind. Yeah. But previously, as you said, you were a scientist, but it was working as a scientist on the placebo effect, where you kind of had your like aha moment that started the whole journey. Can you talk to us a bit about that?
Yeah, so I found that absolutely fascinating. So I was working mostly in cardiovascular R&D, but also partly in cancer, but predominantly cardiovascular. Now, cardiovasculars tend to have a large placebo effect, depending on what the drug, for things like, blood pressure, cholesterol lowering, these sort of things. And I was fascinated. I remember talking to my colleagues about it, and it was always it's just a placebo effect, and no one really thought about it, right? No one really thought or entertained an idea that there could actually be something about your mind that's impacting your body. So I started a wee mini research project on my own, in my own time, when I wanted to understand what was going on, and learned within that job that believing something actually causes your brain to produce what it needs to produce to deliver what it is that you believe. And I remember coming across research on painkillers and people believing that this little white tablet that was a sugar pill, a placebo, was a painkiller, actually caused their brain to manufacture its own painkillers, because the brain has natural versions. They're called opiate. They're called endogenous opiates. Endorphin is one of those, for example. And so the brain does that in response to a belief. And I thought, wow, it's the first time I ever had concrete scientific evidence for the mind-body connection, something I'd always believed in, because I got interested in this years ago when my mum had postnatal depression in the mid-70s. So I was interested in this from the early 80s, when a book literally fell off the shelf in my first week at high school, and it was called The Magic Power of the Mind. And I took it home to give it to my mum because I thought it would help my mum. And my mum and I for years talked about the power of the mind. And here was my wind the clock forward. Here I was in one of the world's biggest pharmaceutical companies, designing and building cardiovascular and cancer drugs, excitedly coming across my first concrete evidence that explains exactly how your mind impacts your body. It's not just all in the mind. Whatever you think about, believe, or feel, or imagine, literally fiddles around with your brain chemistry and your brain circuits. And that also impacts the body, because the brain's connected to the body. So some of that shifting up here also leads to shifting down here. And I was so enthralled by that. I thought, I've got it. And that's when I really started, the idea began to form in my heart that I really want to teach and I want to write. And I really want to write a book, and I really want to teach about this stuff. And after 4 years, that inner momentum was far stronger than the desire to continue doing the job that I was doing. And I just decided one day that I was leaving, and here I am now, sort of thing.
And the rest is history.
Yeah.
And do you miss that life, or because I suppose you're still reading research and doing research, though there's still that element to it.
The only thing I miss is the company and the camaraderie, because when you're working with people in a lab and an office, I worked in a lab and an office, depending on what stage of a project, and I miss the banter and the laughing and the talking about ideas together, like, how do we solve this problem? We're sitting as a team figuring things out. And now for me, I spend a lot of time in coffee shops writing, Cafe Nero, Starbucks, these sort of things. And I like that, because I also get a bit of life. I need to have the life of people around. I need to know that there's people around me. I feel more comfortable in that environment rather than at home all the time writing.
Yeah, I remember when I think I first interviewed you, it was in lockdown, and you were saying you were really missing events and just kind of connecting with people on a like in real life. Because it is like everything we're talking about now. It's like, it's like we can feel the energy from people, can't we? And we pick up on that, and it gives us great feelings and makes us feel good and keeps us healthy.
I think last book was the first book, the only book I've ever written entirely without using coffee shops.
Is that the Woo Woo book?
Yeah, it's the only book that I've written without having been in a coffee shop to write any of it at all.
Oh, now back to Starbucks.
Yeah, Cafe Nero as well.
And how's your physical health generally? Have you ever had any challenges that you've used kind of any of these practices we're going to be talking about?
Luckily, not so much in terms of a medical thing. What I do get, because I play a lot of tennis, and I run around like a 16-year-old. In fact, I had to play against a 16-year-old in the first round of the main draw, and he's like a first division player, and it was really close. And he's 16, running around like a child. I'm 52. I'm running around like a child, and then it was really, really close match. But I from time to time I pick up wee niggles, wee strains from here time to time, and so I actually use visualization as part of my, and also a positive mindset. You're not focusing too much on, oh my God, I've got a wee knee strain. What am I going to do? I just power through it, because I know I understand the body, and I trust that will go away if I'll keep working through it, kind of thing. So a lot of things, you develop this trust that things will improve by themselves if you just continue to look forward. And other times I put a wee bit of visualization energy into things. So my physical health is generally quite good, but I get these wee muscle strains from time to time. which is just, as I play about at least 5 hours of tennis a week, so high impact.
And that's probably a really important point, isn't it? It's like you don't need to be have an illness or a disease or a serious injury to use the practices we're talking about, or to use the power of the mind to keep yourself well. It's kind of like it can be used for maintenance, like you say, with like
Absolutely.
small niggles, and it's just what I love about the book, and we're going to delve into it now, is that the part where you say you're going to think, like that's just what happens. So whatever's going on with your body, your mind's going to be thinking. So you might as well direct it in a positive way.
Absolutely.
So a lot of what we're going to talk about is like what's the content of those thoughts? You might as well make them as positive and as good as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's how I work often with weak and niggly tennis injuries, is saying, okay, well, what's my thinking about this? Am I going to think, oh no, I'm not going to be able to play for a week, or, I feel this wee niggle here, I better not do anything today. And for me, I'm thinking, no, I'm just going to run through it. I'm going to play. And I find that when I do, it just seems to go away, just the activity, plus the mindset, not buying into an idea that I can't do something. And so having that, cultivating a constantly positive, testing my limits, keeping pushing forward all the time without needing to actually do any practical techniques. It's just really being aware where my mind is pointed, and trying to find a way of always projecting it forward. Yeah,
sure. And making that choice. I suppose it becomes more of a habit the more you practice it, like all this stuff. Do you find that you don't go to doctors? Like, do you go to the doctor, or do you feel like you don't need to?
Mostly don't. I've been very, very lucky that I've not needed to for quite some time, and I think that some of that's luck. I think some of that's probably luck. I have a very healthy life. I mean, I exercise as every day, and I eat really well. It's all plant-based, natural. I mean, I cook everything from scratch just because I love it, and it supports my mental health. I love cooking, and so I literally cook everything from scratch because I enjoy it. And it supports my mental health, that sense of improvement and creating and stuff. So, so I think that lifestyle, I think, has helped me that with a wee bit of luck. And I say a wee bit of luck because, sometimes people get ill, it's not their fault. There's a lot of things. And I think I've been maybe lucky in some respects as well. And, touch wood. But yeah, I've fortunately not had to go to the doctors for anything for a while. And I hope that kind of continues. But
and I think that just shows that the stuff, the kind of practices, like the mental practices, they're part of a lifestyle, right? Or they're part of, like, we call it, toolkit. So they're different tools you could use. And so like nutrition, exercise, movement, getting proper sleep, all that kind of stuff. It's like, so I think it's quite important, because you do say in the book as well, there's like there's a point where it's like a note on it's okay to suffer. And it's like, if you're ill, it's like, don't stress that you've made yourself ill by what you're thinking. It's like, we can make changes and move towards a positive way of thinking. But I think it's not helpful, is it? If like self-helpers, we do have a tendency to be like, if I don't think positive all the time, then something bad's going to happen. If I don't do this stuff all the time. So maybe let's talk about that a little bit.
Because sometimes thinking positively is actually being mentally present to some way that you're suffering. And that's still being positive, because you're being present to something that doesn't feel great. The fact that I've not had a great day, for example, or the fact that I can't seem to get out of this hole I've created, kind of thing. Being present to that, and not trying to pretend it away, and not trying to feel like I shouldn't be suffering. It's better to be present and say, okay, I'll acknowledge how I feel. And then you're being positive, because it's better than looking back. It's better than mulling in it, so... So that's sort of how I work, try to find a way of even making peace with what I think about, and making peace with how I feel. Because I write about this kind of stuff, but I don't feel great and cloud nine all the time, because we're all human, and part of being human is life sort of goes up and down, doesn't it? But I think there's a trend, the up and down generally goes in the upwards direction in the longer term. And then some days, on a bad day, you look back and you see you're actually better off than you were in an up day 10 years ago.
Yeah.
No, but I think we have to accept that life goes up and down. If you accept that life has natural, because there's nothing in the universe that doesn't go up and down. It's the nature of, at the very core of reality, we have what are called quantum fields, and by definition, they vibrate. You know, everything vibrates. The earth spins, that's a vibration, it's a rotation. The sun, the earth goes round the sun, it's a rotation. The heart beats, breath goes in and out, we get day and night, everything goes up and down. So why should life not do the same? And so sometimes if you understand that life does these ups and downs, when it's going down, you don't have to think, oh my God, I've screwed up, what have I done wrong, kind of thing. You can just trust that maybe this is just a natural cycle. And maybe all I need to do right now is wait out the storm. Because in a couple of days, things will probably change by themselves without me having to think that I've done anything wrong. Maybe I can just wait out the storm here. And I find that helps me quite a bit, to move through things a wee bit faster, just a wee bit of faith, a wee bit of trust that things often do work themselves out without me getting too worried and stressed about them.
Yeah. And that hope and belief are big factors in like the healing power of the mind, aren't they?
Absolutely,
because that's what a lot of the placebo effect is about, the belief that this is going to do it.
Yeah, belief literally drives brain chemistry. And that's the thing. Brain chemistry moves in the direction of where your mind is. I mean, it moves by itself as well, but within that backdrop of how it naturally does its thing, some of it will go in the direction of what you think about, what you imagine, and what you believe. And that's what drives you harnessing the mind-body connection, is taking control of what direction your mind is pointed in. And then your brain chemistry begins to follow it, because your brain will start to produce what it needs to produce to meet your expectations. And the more you practice it, the easier it becomes, the faster the body seems to respond to the direction of your mind.
Yeah. So I think that, and it's really important then, guys, to we don't need to be focusing on being perfectly healthy, perfectly happy, like what is perfect anyway. Like it's such a good point that things are up and down, in and out, things will pass. Let's talk about our book of the moment then, your wonderful book. Which book was this in the 11? Can you remember?
That was number 10, the 10-year anniversary edition.
Sure, yeah.
Was my 10th book, actually. It was my third book and my 10th book. The original version was my third, and the 10th year anniversary edition was the 10th.
Brilliant. So it casts your mind back. Can you remember why you wrote this book? Like, who did you write it for in the first place? And then we'll talk about what's happened in the 10 years since.
Good question. So the reason why I wrote that, but I remember very clearly why I wrote it, because my first book was called It's the Thought That Counts. And the first half of that book was a mind-body connection. The second half of the book was a mind-world connection, where I started to explore consciousness and all that kind of stuff. And most people who read the book were interested in the mind-body connection. And over the following 2 years of me doing lots of talks, one of the most common questions I was asked was, what's the visualization for cancer? What's the visualization for arthritis? What's the visualization for diabetes? And it was always what's as if there's only one. And I kept explaining to people, there's not just one visualization. It's a way of, as long as you can get from a state, a mindset, and a mental representation, as I call it, of illness, to a way to mentally represent wellness. It doesn't matter how you get there, whether you go that way, around in a wee loop, it doesn't really matter. So there's whatever works for you in getting your mind from an idea of illness to an idea of wellness. And I kept explaining all the time, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to write a book on this. And I'm just going to call it How Your Mind Can Heal Your Body. And so the book actually started by me describing how to create a visualization. And then I worked outwards. And I said, well, okay, now that I've described how to create a visualization, let me I'll share a few examples of ones that worked. And I thought, well, I better explain to people the science of it, because people might not try that if they don't believe a wee bit of science. So I started building the science around the center of that book, which came from questions that people would ask me.
Yeah.
So that's how it came around.
I think it's our dream kind of book and I'm sure these guys will agree with me, it's like we've got the kind of how to's, which we all want. I always want I want the list of like the top 5 bullet points and how can we do this. So we've got the how to's, but there's also this science behind it. So
Yeah.
that's why I love this book as well, why woo woo works, because it's like
Thank you.
for all those people that kind of like tell me that crystals and meditation and all that kind of stuff doesn't work, it's like to be able to have some science behind it as well definitely helps. I think it just helps us kind of like take it in more and like kind of understand it and trust it maybe more.
Yeah.
So in 10 years for the 10-year edition, you said earlier you had 20,000 extra words and you weren't allowed all of them in because that would have been too expensive.
Yeah.
But what I mean, there's always developments, isn't there, in this area, but what were the biggest developments from your point of view?
Well, for me, in the 10 years since the first version came out, and I've done hundreds and hundreds of talks on that subject, and I would, from time to time, I would put some new research studies into the talks, and I thought, I really want to put those in the book as well. So part of the 20,000 words was me putting in a chapter about visualization for recovery from sporting injuries, putting in a chapter on enhancing physical movement abilities, putting in a chapter on visualizations for targeting cancer, visualization to enhance the immune system. All this was done in the 10 years between the very first edition of the book. So, and then what I did is I went through and I brought some of the descriptions and language up to date, meaning the way I described things 10 years ago, sometimes, for some examples, I'd got a wee bit better at describing how something works in a more relatable way, that's more relatable and understandable to the average person who maybe doesn't have a background in science. So I went through the entire book and I brought it all up to date. And I had to do that really because the 20,000 words I had extra actually fitted right in the middle of the book. And I could see the style of writing was crisper and sharper than the rest of the chapter. So I really had to go through and edit everything, to bring it up to the same kind of style. So I added in, a few new studies and like new placebo studies, new studies in every single chapter. I added research on the placebo effect, on something called placebo-controlled dose reduction. Some new research that shows that for some conditions and some drugs, over a period of 4 or 5 days, you can wean someone off a drug altogether by incrementally replacing it with a placebo, providing they don't know that that's happening. And what happens is the brain begins to react to you believing that this is the same thing. So, for example, on day 1, you get 100% of the drug. But on day 2, you get 75%, but they top it up with 25% placebo. On day 3, you get 50% drug, 50% placebo, etc., until on day 5, there's no drug, but it's 100% placebo. But each day, your belief is driving the brain chemistry. So by day 5, you've completely replaced the drug. So I added those sorts of brand new studies into the book.
Brilliant. And as you say in the book, I think maybe at the beginning, it's like the placebo effect is now studied as in its own right. Whereas when you were working as a scientist, people would say, oh, it's just the placebo effect.
Yeah,
it was like very much like a
dismissed it, scoffed at it.
Yeah.
Really. Yeah.
Unbelievable. It's amazing then. Like it's amazing that there's just more and more kind of research and backing and proof that it's working, which I think is just brilliant.
And Toni, it's gone so far that some of the brand new big tech companies like Neuralink, Elon Musk company, and all that's based on research in the mind-body connection. Let me explain. So one of the things we realize through the mind-body connection is that the moment you have a thought and you think about your fingertip, for example, then the area of the brain connected to that fingertip literally lights up, right? So there's a wee spark, a wee set of hundreds of neurons will fire in the region of the brain connected to that fingertip. If I move my attention to my thumb instead, then the previous neurons, that activity shuts down, and now the activity in the brain corresponds to that, the area corresponding to that part. So we realize now that wherever you place your attention in the body, you light up the corresponding region of the brain that connects to it. And that nowadays, that was originally scoffed at, but now it's gone so far that these companies, what they're doing, they're putting implants into the brain that will read exactly where the activity is. So, for example, recent research showed someone who was tetraplegic, who could think of their right hand then the right-hand part of the brain lit up, and that's connected to a computer called a brain-computer interface, which now reads where that activity was in the brain and sets a command to move an object in that direction. And what they actually did is they got a computer keyboard and they allowed someone who was tetraplegic to control a cursor and type an email with their mind.
Wow.
By literally controlling a cursor to go different directions up and down. At the same time, turn a stereo up and down. And that is only possible because of pioneering work into how the placebo effect works and how the mind-body connection works.
Yeah, that's
incredible. The fact that the body responds to where your attention is. You know, energy flows where attention goes. The fact that that's a true thing, that's what gave birth to Neuralink and all these other brand new tech companies that billions are being invested into.
Yeah, incredible. So it's like the mind is overcoming the limitations of the body where it can. Because I think it's because we talk about visualization a lot in the club, but it's quite often it's in relation to your future best self or your best life, or kind of like planning and kind of looking forward. And I hear a lot, we read a lot about the idea that the brain doesn't know the difference between what's actually happening and what's being vividly imagined. But here it's like this is the practical use of that information, which I think is brilliant. So meditation, affirmations, visualization, all included in here. Obviously, the visualization is the main body of the book, and you share loads of examples, which I think is brilliant, of how different people have used it and different ways to do it. But can you talk to us a bit about meditation then, and why that's important with regard to these kind of practices?
Yeah, so meditation actually changes the physical structure of your brain, and I love that, because I started dabbling in meditation when I was a full-time R&D scientist, and some of my friends thought that was amusing. Some of them thought I was literally off my rocker. Thought, what are you, meditation? Because the only concept people had for meditation was a bare-chested guru sitting cross-legged, and that's, you know, you were talking back in the late 90s. That's the only context most people had. Most people that
it was very hippie.
Yeah, the people who weren't immersed in self-help work. If you weren't immersed in self-help work, then to anyone else, the only context they have for that is a bare-chested guru kind of thing. And so when I started doing it, some people thought, you know, that I was, you know, some weren't necessarily very kind. One guy actually hated me for all the stuff. I don't know.
No one can hate Dr. David Hamilton. That's not allowed.
He literally hated me. And he was very open about it, you know, and I think it just really bugged him. Some of the stuff that I was in that he considered unscientific. You know, now I would argue that my grasp of science was far better than his. But yeah, we didn't argue about it at the time, but I would still stick to that. But that scientists argue with each other all the time, but I do it kindly. He certainly wasn't at that time. But I forgot what I was talking about there.
We're talking about meditation.
Yeah, meditate. Yeah. So meditation actually changes the physical structure of the brain. It's like a muscle. You know, if I go to the gym and I work out a muscle, then, you know, three things happen. The muscle becomes firmer, becomes larger, it becomes more powerful. When you work out a region of the brain, something very similar happens. We don't call it muscle growth, we call it neuroplasticity. Scientists like to sound really cool, so they've got their own names for it. But the idea is more or less the same. So if I was to meditate, the simplest form, mindfulness, be mindful of the fact that I'm breathing. So bring your attention to your breath. And if I do that regularly, then what I'm actually doing is I'm working out this frontal part of the brain. I'm actually working out. It's like taking it to the gym, because I'm activating it consistently. So that's like, if I go to the gym and work out a muscle, I'm activating the muscle consistently. So if I meditate, let's say every day for 5 or 10 minutes, then I'm activating this part of the brain consistently. So naturally, it's going to undergo some form of change. And the change, instead of being called muscle growth, is called neuroplasticity. It literally physically changes. It becomes firmer, larger, and more powerful, just like a muscle. Meaning, firmer and larger means it develops more neural connections. Think of them like roots in a tree. Imagine the tree has been watered, and now the water is causing it to grow more roots, and it's growing. And the more you water it, the more you activate it, feed it, the more roots it creates. And now it's connecting with the roots on another tree. And if you look underneath the ground, all these millions and millions of new roots are being formed because you're watering the tree, you're feeding the tree. So if you meditate regularly, you're feeding your neural networks. And so they begin to grow like roots in a tree. And it looks very similar, incidentally. And because of that, what actually happens is it expands, it pushes the brain cells apart. So it becomes firmer, larger, firmer meaning there's more neural connections, larger, and it becomes more powerful. It's like you move from dial-up to broadband. You know, move from 30 megabyte broadband to 100 megabyte broadband. The more connections you have, the more computing power your brain has. So that part of the brain becomes more powerful. That part of the brain is involved in concentration, free will, being able to have self-control, manage your state kind of thing. So as that becomes more powerful through the practice of meditation, you become better at self-control, better at managing yourself, managing your state, better at concentrating, all these things that muscle effectively does. So that's how meditation physically changes the brain. Now, 20 years ago, we'd have laughed at that idea. In fact, people did, including the guy who hated me, because I suggested that something like that probably happened, because I was an amateur athlete at the time, and I equated, which I still do, muscle growth with neural growth. And so I was using that as an example, and that really bothered that really bothered him and a few other people at the time, you know. But it's true. It's actually, now we know it's actually true. 20 years later, 25 years later, we actually know that to be a scientific fact. We laughed at it 25 years ago, but we now know it to be a scientific fact.
And do you make meditation part of your day, part of your daily routine, the morning routine, or?
I meditate in a few different ways. So I do a standard mindfulness, sometimes for, you know, just a couple of minutes, sometimes for longer. I also do what I call kindfulness, where I direct my attention kindly to people, to things, even if it's to life itself. I just try to find a kind way of thinking about something or someone. And another thing I do a lot is I try to be mindful as I'm going about my day. So if I'm just, even if it's just 10 seconds, washing my hands, I try to be mindful of what that feels like. What's the texture of the water? What's the temperature of the water? Even as I'm typing, when I'm working on my laptop, even just for 10 seconds, just becoming aware of what that sensation of the keyboard sounds like, and what it feels like and what it sounds like. Just several moments of short-term mindfulness. So you don't really need to sit for half an hour. You can actually probably create half an hour of several mindful moments, just bringing your mindful attention for 10 or 20 seconds at a time to something. And I do that a lot. I find that for me really helps me develop my present moment concentration better than sitting for 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah, and it's a great way to, like you say, fit it into the day and for certain things. So the mindfulness, would that have the same physical impact on this part of the brain you were talking about?
Exactly the same, because that is the part of the brain that activates when you concentrate. So it doesn't really matter whether you concentrate for 10 seconds or 10 minutes. What matters is that you do it consistently. It's the consistency more than the duration that matters. You know, I mean, I do both. I'm not saying that is better than that. I actually do both, but it depends on the content of my day, you know, the busyness of my day, whether I'll do a seated meditation or dominate more of my time with pockets of mindfulness throughout the day.
Yeah, and it's about being realistic, isn't it? Like when like Jen's just said in the chat that she does it when she gets home after work, and it's not there's no right or wrong, is there? It's just like whatever, however you can fit it into your day. And like you said, it's the consistency. And you talk in the book as well about especially when it comes to visualization and probably meditation, it's repetition. So it's like kind of keeping it going, not just doing it once and expecting.
The 3 rules of mental practice. The 3 rules of mental practice: repetition, repetition, repetition.
Yeah. So just keep going. Just keep going. Do you have a top on when you meditate? It's a question I'm sure lots of people are wondering.
Well, you see, I'm quite modern, you see, so usually I do, unless it's sometimes if I'm just sitting on top of my bed, you know, depending on, you know, what time it is, kind of thing, occasionally, but most of the time, you know, it might. In fact, sometimes I meditate right here. This is my wee corner. You see, all my research. That's a That's pretty heavy. That's a heavy book. I mean, it's actually heavy.
That is definitely not going to be book of the moment in January, everyone, just so you know.
Summary of present knowledge about cosmological parameters. Yeah. So, but I've got all my mathematics and physics in that wee cabinet stuff. So this is but it's also my meditation corner. So I've got a wee sofa here that I sit on.
Oh yeah.
Thing here, and this is my meditation corner kind of thing. So
it is good, isn't it, to kind of carve out a space,
yeah,
like kind of that you kind of like, because then your brain's like, when you're going to that space, you know what's about to happen, and
yeah,
I think it is good, and it makes it like a more of a ritual, which is
yeah,
it's always just good for us, isn't it?
yeah, definitely.
So we've got a little bit of time left. Just before we go into our visualization, can I ask you about positive thinking generally? Because the book starts off talking about positive thinking, and you are a huge fan. Quite often, quite a lot of the chat in our group around positive thinking is like, sometimes people are just like, I just don't know, I can't do it. So like when you're in the thick of something and not feeling positive, do you have any advice on kind of like how, like you touched on it earlier, actually, just in a kind of like, sometimes just being present can be positive, but like if that's not your natural or default state, do you have any advice for us?
Yeah, see, positive thinking doesn't necessarily have to be future thinking, like saying I'm going to, I'm going to get out of there, I'm going to create all these millions. Positive thinking could be just finding a way to manage your state. It could be finding a way to just trust. I mean, positive thinking for me sometimes is trusting that, that up and down I talked about earlier, that I've just hit a wee trough, and it will naturally, sometimes by itself, sometimes through my agency, or sometimes a bit of both. And so positive thinking for me sometimes is just that momentary trust that I know that famous saying, this too will pass. And so sometimes I reach for that idea. I know, because I know by experience. And most people know by experience, this will pass. And positive thinking for me is also, if I can't find a positive, even sometimes I'm trying to find a future thinking thing. Sometimes for me, positive thinking is saying, okay, I'm just going to be present. I'm just going to, how do I feel right now? I'm being positive in the sense that I'm accepting where I'm at. I'm accepting how I feel, and that I don't feel $1 million right now. Another version of positive thinking for me is kind thinking. I find it easier to think kindly than positive sometimes, depending on the situation, depending on the person, depending on the context. Again, coming back to your future thinking, positive, which is most people's idea of positive thinking. You're thinking about the future. I'm going to get there, or I'm going to do such and such a thing. But for me, it's easier to think a kind thought about someone. Maybe this person who's been a bit of an ass, for example. I wonder if they're having a bad day, because you never know what's going on in someone's life. You never know. I mean, something I was writing in my new book, actually. I reflected back. I lost my dad last year. He had a brain tumor, glioblastoma, and I remember I used to take him for his radiotherapy appointments. And the way the tumor affected my dad's brain is one of the ways he got really anxious if things about time. So if we were leaving, if I was driving over to pick up my mum and dad to take him to the hospital, and we were going to leave at, say, 9:15, even though we weren't, that would get us there about maybe 10 o'clock, and the appointment was 10:30. My dad would need to be there for 10 o'clock. But my dad would be sitting at 7:30 in the chair with his jacket and his bonnet on, because that was him just being ready, kind of thing. And one morning I was caught a wee bit unawares. I just got caught up with things, and I was running a wee bit late. Not late, we'd still get there half an hour early, but late that my dad might be a wee bit worried, and he might sometimes have walked out the car park wondering where I was. And I was hammering along the road, and I came off the motorway about a mile from my mum and dad's house, and I pulled out in front of someone, and it was totally my fault. We didn't crash, but we nearly did, and the person was on the roundabout and rammed the foot in the brakes. And you just suddenly expect that someone's going to peep the horn and give you a mouthful of abuse. But instead, the guy smiled at me and he went, "On you go." And I drove around the roundabout and I burst into tears. because it suddenly got me thinking, you know, because I couldn't have coped with someone being angry with me at that moment, because I was really vulnerable. I still feel a wee bit even teary than now recalling back that moment, but you know, I couldn't have coped with someone being angry with me at that moment. And normally what people would be is angry at someone who's just almost caused an accident, but he wasn't. And it got me thinking, you never know what's going on in a person's life. And he, from his perspective, he had no idea what was going on in my life. He had no idea that I was rushing to pick up my dad because I was scared of my dad being late. I was so scared because I knew my dad would be anxious. He'd be down at the car waiting, where's David, where's David, even though we're hours early. And he had no idea what was going on in my life. And I turn that around, and I think sometimes, rather than thinking positively, I think kindly, because you never know what's going on in someone's life when they're being an ass or something, or when they're behaving, or when some set of conditions don't meet, they're not exactly as you want them to be, and there's someone who's maybe fault, it seems to be. You never know what's going on in their life at that moment. And that experience was life-changing for me, you know, one of my many life-changing moments, because it just hit home from someone else's perspective. I've thought about it from my perspective when I forgive people, let people off, but it's the first time I actually thought about it from someone else's perspective. What must he have thought? But he just simply went, it's okay, on you go.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, so to be on the receiving end of that is
first
amazing.
time I'd ever been thought of it from someone else's perspective.
And as you say in a lot of your work, like being kind, like you've got nothing to lose by doing the kind thing. You've actually got everything to gain, because it ultimately helps you feel better by being the person, like by giving the kind gesture as well. So let's always err on that side of things.
So oftentimes it's easier to think kindly than positive. And so I reach for kindness sometimes before trying to be positive, because out of kindness usually comes some form of positivity by itself, and sometimes even not in the direction you were trying to go in.
So but it's taking you out of it's just taking you out of yourself, isn't it? Which is, and gives you that different perspective, which is like is so valuable. I just wanted to share this book, A Complaint-Free World, because I've been reading this. My husband's tried to read it 4 times. It hasn't worked yet. But I've been reading it, and you mentioned it early on, coincidentally or synchronistically, you mentioned it in the book. But so it's sometimes just not complaining is the positive thing to do, right? Like it's like you don't need to say it out loud. It's like, yes, it's a situation that's happening, but choosing not to voice it, and choosing not to voice it to someone else can be is an action. So it's like still an action in the right way, I think. Wonderful, thank you for that. I think that's really, really useful for people to hear.
Thanks.
Should we get practical?
Yeah.
Guys, we're going to do a visualization. So how long are we going to take, David? 5 minutes or so?
I could do a quick 5-minute version of quantum field healing.
Yeah, let's do that. That'd be brilliant. Thank you.
So quantum field healings, where basically we drop our imagination down through, you know, a part of the body that we want to fix, to heal. And you can do this for someone else as well, like a prayer. And we imagine what it's like in the body, then the cells, then in the DNA. Then we take our imagination into the atoms, down to the quantum field, and we visualize a ache or a pain or a disease or an injury or something that we want to repair as waves of energy. And we literally just change the waves. We get rid of the old ones and put in some new positive ones, and then we just come back out of the body the same way we went in. So that you can, there's a speeded up version that I sometimes do. It's about 5 minutes long. It's the one that, you know, there's a longer version on my website. It's free. You can download it, do whatever you like with it. But I myself do a faster version, which is about 5 minutes, which is the one we'll do here.
And would you recommend that people have like a specific area or issue to think about?
Yeah, so it could be a physical thing, or it could be an emotional thing, or a mental thing, or even a life challenge that you want to get rid of. Because when you go right to the core of reality, maybe you think of the quantum field, and everything is born there, including the difficulties and challenges of your life. So you can, when you get down there, it doesn't matter what part of the body you enter into. You just pick a cell somewhere, you know, on your fingertip if you like, because it's all the same quantum field. And we go down till we reach the quantum field. So I would say, show me the waves of this illness or injury or disease, or this frustrating life circumstance or this thing that I want to shift in my life. And just imagine the waves of what that vibrations of what that's like. We're just going to say the word cancel and get rid of it. Then we can replace them with something some gentle vibes and come right back out. So it could be a physical thing, an emotional thing, a life situation that you want to change, or you can do this for someone else as if you're saying a prayer for them.
Brilliant. Okay, I'm going to unpin myself then and get involved. I'll let you run with this, and then I'll come back on when you're finished.
Right, fantastic, right. So just start by bringing your attention to your breath just for a few seconds, just with a conscious intention to relax your body and your mind. And as you're relaxing and breathing, decide what you would like to do this visualization for. Is it for something physical, something mental, emotional, or is it for a life situation or something like that that you would like to change? Or even is this a prayer for someone else? And now take your attention with that in mind to any part of the body that you're drawn to. It might be a part of the body that you're trying to fix or heal, or it might be a fingertip, a hair on your head. If it's for something that you wish to shift, it doesn't matter in that respect, because we all get to the same place at the core. And now take your imagination into that part of the body and imagine what that's like. Now, we all imagine in our own way, so you might see, sense, feel. However you imagine, you're doing it right. You can only do it right. Now imagine that you're inside that part of the body and you're now at the level of the DNA, and imagine what the DNA would be like. Either see, sense, or feel it even to the touch. Now DNA is made of atoms, so imagine you're becoming so small now you're inside the DNA and you're face to face with the atoms. And imagine what those atoms would be like. And now take your imagination inside the atoms. And you're now floating in the vastness of space. And it looks like stars in the sky, but the stars in the sky are subatomic particles, like protons, neutrons, electrons. And now take your attention even deeper into the fabric of space itself until you emerge at the absolute core of reality in your imagination, the quantum field, a place of total stillness with only subtle vibrations of pure energy moving around within this quantum field. And now at this core of reality, the quantum field, this is where everything is born from. Everything emerges, every physical state, every life condition state emerges from here. So imagine now the thing that you wish to shift, whether it's a physical, mental, emotional, or life condition. Imagine what the waves, what the vibes of that would be like in this quantum field. And imagine what those vibes would be like. And then mentally say the word cancel. And as you say cancel, imagine those vibrations, those vibes of this thing just literally gone, gone. They've been erased from the fabric of space and time. They literally no longer exist anywhere in the quantum field. And now let's replace them with vibes of what you would like to have, whether it's a healed state of some part of the body, or a healed state, mental or emotional state, or a new life situation you would like to have. Imagine what the vibes of that would be like. And see them, imagine them, whether you see, sense, or feel, imagine them moving out into, literally vibrating in this quantum field at the heart of reality. And imagine them in any way that you wish to imagine these vibes of this new state, this chosen state, moving and vibrating through the quantum field. And now, because they are moving and vibrating through the quantum field, they literally create that state in your experience. So as you bring your attention now back to the atoms in the body, imagine what those atoms now would be like, because they emerged from the vibrations of this new state. And trust that what you see, sense, or feel is confirmation of that shift. Now, as the atoms join together to form the DNA now is essentially evolved out of these vibes of this new state. So now imagine what that DNA would be like. Either see, sense, or feel it, and trust that what you see, sense, or feel is confirmation of that state. And now bring your attention back to the place that you began the visualization in. And imagine what that would be like in this new state. And trust that what you see, sense, or feel is confirmation of that state. And then bring your attention back to your breath, back to your breathing. And start to wiggle your fingers and your toes and bring your full presence and awareness back into the room that you're in right now. And then just give your shoulders a wee flex and a wee stretch. Give your fingers and your toes a wee stretch. Take a big, deep breath and open your eyes. And that's quantum field healing.
Everybody's got time for a bit of that, haven't they, in their day? Everyone looks relaxed, very healthy, I think. Sleepy, but healthy.
Good to hear it.
Thank you. I've just had to let my dog in because he was barking outside, so apologies if he wants. I think he wants to be involved.
He wanted to be involved as well.
Always. Also, I've just been looking through some of the comments, and I think you need to know that people want you to do a cookbook next, talking about the cookery. And also Becky shared that she said she got better following 3 years of illness with ME CFS, which left her using a wheelchair and largely homebound. She used meditation and visualization. So 100% believer in this. So
brilliant. Well done.
So good, isn't it?
Well done you. And thanks for sharing that with everyone.
Yeah. I just think it's so important.
Build a wee bit of faith. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so important to see examples, and that's why there's like the chunk in here of examples, and that people that have contacted you directly to talk about how it's impacted them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've got, I've collected in the book lots of examples because I love hearing people's success stories, because I find by sharing people's success stories, like a woman who had chronic kidney disease with her kidney function so low that she'd be projected to be on dialysis, and she's only in her mid-40s, by visualizing her cleaning her cells, by turning what looked like her imagination disease cells into healthy cells every single day, she completely recovered and restored her kidney function. These sorts of people with cancer, visualizing their immune system destroying cancer cells, all these kind of examples I love to reshare with people, because I think when you hear other people's stories, it gives you a wee bit of faith that this is 100%. Possible, and I can do this too. Yeah,
totally. Well, hopefully after we read this as a group, then we'll have more success stories for you. Would you recommend that people who are reading this along with us then focus on a specific area?
You can focus on one thing at a time, or if you have multiple things, you can actually imagine doing like a wee tour of the body where you literally tune up different parts. Or you can sometimes do quantum field healing and say, okay, I'm going to go to the master issue right at the core. What is there one thing right at the very core that's feeding all of these things? Let's change it at the core. You could work on that as a quantum field healing visualization. Change it right at the core. This thing that's feeding all of these multiple conditions, kind of thing. You can do it anything you want, because it's your imagination. Be as creative as you like, actually.
Yeah, and you talk a lot about the immune system, because the immune system is the system that heals us, right? So anything we can do and how positive thinking actually boosts that, and all of the stuff in here boosts that. So wonderful.
Yeah, and using visualization not instead of whatever else you're doing, whatever medical device you're following, not instead of, but I use visualization as well as other things. Just as you don't meditate instead of sleeping, you meditate as well as sleeping. So you visualize as well as whatever else you're actually doing. It's just a way of saying, well, you have to think. So you might as well, as you're doing your other things, you may as well point your mind in a direction that's going to benefit you.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you so much. And thank you for finishing on that visualization.
Absolute pleasure.
Guys, I hope you've enjoyed today and got a lot from it. I know I can tell you can. The chat's been going wild, which we love. That's always a good sign.
Good.
So practical science, I love it. It's such a good combination. Thank you, Dr. David, for your time. Good luck with your next book, with the
Thank you.
deadline coming
Yeah,
up.
thank you.
And yeah, and guys, David, if you need to leave now, that's fine. And if anybody else wants to stay on, I can talk to you about the meetups and stuff. So we'll say good night.
Great. Well, thanks very much, everyone. It's been really lovely to meet you all, and thanks for reading the book, and thanks, Toni, for inviting me on and for choosing this book. Again, it's always a pleasure talking to you and, you know, chatting with the group. So thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Take care.
You too.
Lots
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye then.
Take care.
Take care.
Okay, guys, it's 8 o'clock on the dot. If you need to leave, I just wanted to say thank you for being here. How cool was that? Don't we love Dr. David? How could anyone not like him? I can't believe it. I think that says more about them than him. Yeah. So hopefully you enjoyed that. I know lots of you are already reading along with us. If not, then our read along starts today. And if you'd like to join our book club, then David's going to share the link if he hasn't already. We're going to start the reading today. There's going to be a different target every week. And online, we have a private community. We have book club to get together to talk about what we're learning. I think it's such a good idea to kind of, as we just did then, focus on maybe a particular area. So then as we go through the book and the practices and the exercises, then by the end, then hopefully, I saw that somebody in the chat said that their foot was already aching less after that 5 minutes. So imagine if we read a whole book, what we can do together. So yeah, read along starts today. This time next week, I think we have a watch party. We're going to be watching the new Netflix series, Live to 100. Some of you guys might have seen it already. I thought we could watch the first episode, because that's all about longevity and health, and how it's not what you think that helps you live those long lives. So we'll be watching that and chatting in the app. So thank you guys for being here. Awesome to see you. Hopefully you will have a lovely week and can take some of that quantum healing vibes, peaceful vibes and healing vibes with you. Yeah, thank you for being here. Great session. And I will see you online. Stay in touch. See you online shortly. Take care, guys. Have a lovely week.